Hello, welcome to Remember the Film. The podcast is not set so much as a single toe in that ocean, and I love the ocean. I'm your host, Josh Bradley, and I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts, the man who said, fuck fish, Jeff Grizz Ulrich.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
He hates them.
I'm doing pretty good,
he
man.
He hates fish. Like, he's always talking about how much he hates fish.
He renounces fish.
I renounce fish.
He renounces
Every
fish.
time we're not recording, it's just fish talk for some reason. It's weird.
Yeah, I got a big.
And the other guy bringing up fish talk. The other guy bringing up fish talk is Hugo Panay. What's up, Hugo?
Hello. I'm in the UK now because I'm on an exchange, so I'm still trying to get my bearings. But the podcast is going on, which is great.
But you are adapting.
I am adapting.
Surroundings.
I am adapting to a new
in the
surroundings.
Darwinian sense. Yes.
A comedy.
And today we are talking about the movie Adaptation, which is why I'm making adapting pun. Not really even really a pun, just using the word as it exists. It's not a pun at all.
It's just
Yeah, we're talking about Adaptation. Spike Jonze made it, but I call it a Charlie Kaufman movie, even though he did not direct it. It's a Charlie Kaufman script. Spike Jonze directed. And I'm super excited to talk about it, but before we do that, we got to get through our first segment, which is where we talk about what we've been watching this week. And I want to ask Grizz. Grizz, what have you been watching this week, bro?
Well, I did my homework, and I did watch Being John Malkovich, so I have finally seen that beginning to end. I also watched, I don't know if this was before the last time, or I think since the last time we were together, I watched Belle, the new Mamoru Hosoda film.
I think you
Did we
mentioned
talk about that
last week. Yeah,
I can't remember.
Yeah. I think you did.
Still fun, good music. And then the other thing I watched was Tick Tick Boom.
Me
which
too.
I did see that you watched that this week as well, Josh. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. I enjoyed it, but I was not absolutely sent by it like many other people I know were. And the other thing I watched this week was Injustice, the DC animated movie based loosely on the video game. And
nice.
it was
what's the deal? What's the deal with Injustice?
The setup is that the Joker tricks Superman into killing Lois and his unborn baby, and then he gets a little grumpy about it, and he punches a hole through the Joker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's graphically violent.
That's awesome.
And then things kind of go off the rails because now Superman,
because they were so on the rails before they,
But Superman kind of comes to the conclusion that he has the power to stop all violence in the world if by threatening violence because he's Superman, and things proceed. It gets a little weird.
That sounds cool.
It's cool, but I like the story.
Cool.
I like the story better in the video game. They changed it up for the movie, and I think they did that just because there would have been no point in making this movie if they didn't try to do it a little differently than the story from the video game because the video game is not that long.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it's not even based on like a comic book storyline, right? It's like
correct. The storyline was made for the video game first, and then they made a comic adaptation of the video game, and now they've made a movie adaptation.
That's
as
interesting.
Well. Yeah, it was cool.
It should be the other way around. Yeah,
but that's what I watched.
There's a lot of adaptation going on. Am I right?
Puns, not really though. Hugo, what'd you watch this week?
Well, I watched the Park Chan-wook vampire thriller Thirst, which
cool.
I am going to be talking about with Christian on Large Popcorn coming out soon. And
shout out to Christian, friend of the show, in the Twitch stream right now.
Yeah.
At least he was. Is he still there?
Thirst
lurking.
is
okay.
One of the. It's by the director of Old Boy and the Vengeance trilogy and the Handmaiden. And it's about a Catholic priest from Korea that goes to Africa.
Always a great start.
That goes to Africa to do some weird experiments and becomes a vampire. And it's
classic priests, man.
Classic priest. It's one of the weirder movies I've ever seen, but in a good way. I think it's very interesting. Imagine what the director of Old Boy would do with Twilight, and you get this movie pretty much. It's crazy. I also watched the movie Ready or Not. Like horror, not really horror, kind of horror thriller comedy movie for a couple of years ago, I think. Same directors as the new Scream movie.
Right.
Which is why I watched it. Yeah. Really fun movie. I mean, there's some stuff at the end that I was like, that kind of took me out of it. But like overall, I had a really good time. It's like a quick hour and 40 minutes. And if you want to just put on something that's gory and fun, I think you'll have a great time with that.
Yeah, I missed that when it came out, but like people seem to really like that.
It's fun.
I should get to that at some point. Yeah,
it's not like, I don't know. I didn't think it was incredible, but I thought it was really fun. It's a really cool premise.
Is it decidedly more thriller than horror?
It's very violent, but I wouldn't say it's scary at all. Like,
okay.
There's no. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much, if you can handle Scream. I think Scream has more scary moments than this.
Okay,
really.
Well
This
then I
is
can
more
definitely
violent,
handle this.
Yeah, this is fine. Like, it's not, Then I also watched, just today, for some reason, I decided to destroy my own brain by watching Synecdoche. How do you even say this word? New York. Synecdoche, New York, which is the directorial debut by Charlie Kaufman, right?
It is, yes.
And I think I'm glad that I did watch it, because in some ways it made me appreciate Adaptation even more, even though I really enjoyed Adaptation. Spoilers for the discussion. And I think it's a good point of comparison to Charlie Kaufman's work when it's just writing, and Charlie Kaufman's work when he's just free to do everything. And so when he's directing the movie, I think it's a very interesting juxtaposition. Synecdoche itself, a movie that I found I think it's a masterpiece, but it's also a disaster. Like, it's both at the same time, and it's very hard to reconciliate how I feel about it, because I think it's genius, and I also think if it had a little more restraint, it could be one of my favorite movies. But for some reason, it isn't. Like, it's still like a 4-star movie for me. I think it's genuinely brilliant in so many ways, but it's also a little frustrating to get through. I'm sure you've seen it, Josh, but I don't know if you...
Future film to remember, Synecdoche, New York, for sure. I understand your take. However, my take is that it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. It's one of the best movies that's made in the last 30 years, for sure. Yeah. Roger Ebert, who I'm a disciple of, as you know, called it the best movie of the 2000s, and he nearly put it on his top 10 of all time list. It was going to be either that or Tree of Life. He ended up going with Tree of Life, but Synecdoche was like number 11 basically. So I have a lot of thoughts about it, and we can talk about it in a full episode someday in the future.
It's another one of those films that I think if I watch it 4 times, after the 4th watch I'd be like, yo, this is just genius, and I understand every single part of it, why it's necessary. But watching it the first time, it's so overwhelming that
it's extremely dense. It's like one of the most, it's maybe the most dense movie I've ever seen in terms of visually and narratively and thematically, for that
How much time do you spend while watching that movie saying Synecdoche in your head? Because just during this conversation, I just keep saying Synecdoche.
Zero.
None. Zero. Yeah, I did not.
I know that's not how it's pronounced. That's how I read it. And then it's in my head, Synecdoche.
Also, really great title. First of all, that's a good vocabulary word, Synecdoche. I learned what that is because of the movie.
Mm-hmm. It's a figure of speech.
For those who want to learn, it means using like the part of something to refer to the whole, or using the whole of something to refer to a part. And Schenectady is a town in New York.
Yes.
So that title is actually a pun. It is Synecdoche, New York, which is a pun, and also Synecdoche is extremely relevant to the plot of that movie. Again, using a part to refer to the whole. He builds a world within a world within a world within a world in Synecdoche.
Oh, Charlie.
That's where we begin. Yes, indeed. Well, that's cool, man. Anything else you watched, or is that the last one?
No, I mean, yesterday it was my birthday, and I went to see the Matrix.
Happy birthday, Hugo! Woo! Woo! Yeah. What are you now, like 23?
I'm 26. Which
oh
sucks.
My god!
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 foot in the grave.
Sucks. Yeah.
1 foot in the grave.
Genuinely does, but it's okay. I'm alright. I'm fine.
I'm fine.
I promise I'm fine.
I was at a 30th birthday party last night, so your baby turning 26.
I get it. But there's something about being closer to 30 than to 20 that stings, you know?
Yep.
I gotta say, man, your 30s are pretty cool. At least I'm only a couple years into them.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying, Josh. Everyone who complains about their 30s, I'm like, I don't get it. 30s have been great for me.
Yeah.
I like it.
I like to. I'm gonna believe you guys. So something to look.
So
forward to.
speaking of entering your 30s and getting old, I watched Tick Tick Boom this week, which is a movie where Jonathan Larson laments turning 30, among other things. Grizz, kind of like you, like I thought it was pretty good. Like I enjoyed it. I liked it more than I thought I would. Didn't love it, but I think I liked it about as much as I was ever gonna like a movie like this. Having never been a theater kid myself, I can see the movie has real theater kid energy.
It really
and I mean
does.
that as like take that to however you want to mean. Like I mean it as a compliment and kind of an insult, but like mostly a compliment. But like it's got theater kid energy. It's just it is what it is. But yeah, I thought it was really good. Andrew Garfield's really freaking good in that.
He is.
He's probably gonna get nominated for Best Actor. I hope so because he's great. And some of the songs are just bangers.
Yeah, I think my issue with it is
yeah.
that some of the songs were absolute bangers, and then other ones...
Some of them were pretty forgettable, yeah.
And so it kind of makes sense why this wasn't a hit for Jonathan Larson, the way that Rent was, because every song in Rent is an absolute banger. So, I think this... you don't agree? We're going to have to talk about that later.
I mean, Rent. Everyone has their thoughts on Rent. I think. I don't feel like I'm informed enough to have thoughts on Rent, but
I have zero thoughts on Rent. I barely know what it is. So
it's not the songs that I'm kind of.
Oh well, yeah. Lots of people have issues with the portrayal of that lifestyle
and the content,
and the content and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people. But the music itself is fantastic, and
it's pretty good.
In Tick Tick Boom. I for me, it was like about half the time. I was like, oh, yeah, now we're getting it. I can see the shades of what I love from Rent. And then other times, I'm like, okay, well, it's not bad.
Yeah. And then the other thing I watched was just in preparation for this conversation, I rewatched Being John Malkovich for the first time in a while. Good movie, but man, that's just a weird movie.
It's
man.
a hard sell.
I'm with it. I'm with the movie up until the whole eternal old people plot is introduced. When it gets there, I'm like, okay.
I'm glad you got hung up on that as well, Hugo, because I was like, wait, what?
I was like, sure. I just like I
That's
thought
what I
the
had
movie
to
was about something else, and it's the story itself is going in a direction that I don't understand how it fits with the themes.
That much felt very out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, but apart from that, I think really good movie.
There's a lot of just you just have to accept it with that movie because
I don't even mind that because it's obviously so fantastical that I'm not necessarily hung up on the mechanics of how it works. That's not I don't really mind that, but I just think that plot point is I don't know, maybe superfluous, but I might be just again it's another one of those really weird movies that maybe if you watch it again it makes more sense. Everything else I think fits into one theme, and that part just kind of I don't understand its function thematically.
I mean, it has to create stakes and like a
exactly.
a binary this will happen or this will happen kind of thing, so that the climax can happen. I guess like that's my tepid defense of it, but like I agree with you guys that like the charm for me, the charms of that movie are number one, just the originality of the idea. That's a big selling point, and number two, like the specificity about like the floor 7.5 and the secretary being unable to understand anything anybody says,
but being absolutely convinced that everyone else is speaking poorly.
The chimpanzee and like the very, very weird off-kilter, like the interactions people have with each other is like, it's kind of like an elevated, it's not like how normal people talk to each other. Like when Maxine and I can't remember the
John Cusack
character's name, John Cusack. Yeah. When they talk to each other, like it's very strange. I don't know. I like the movie a lot, but it's interesting that like I've known about the movie for a long time and I've seen it from an early age. So like coming back to it with kind of fresh eyes this week for the first time in a while, because you guys were watching it for the first time, you kind of step back and you're like, man, this is really weird. This is just really, really bizarre.
There's just a couple, like, for me, it was the old people, and then the part where John Malkovich goes through the portal himself.
I love that part.
I enjoyed it a lot, but it is one of those parts that makes you question, like, they had set up rules for how this works, and then like they break the rules there, right? And
well, him going into the tunnels is breaking the rules,
right?
You know?
I love that part as well. I think
so. It was super interesting, but that's also a part I'm like, wait, okay, I guess I just have to accept it.
Honestly,
I also just think it's a stroke of genius to choose John Malkovich for this.
Completely agree.
Like, because he's not like, because I think a lesser version of this movie is, oh, you're the sexiest movie star in the world.
Yeah,
you're
being Robert Downey
life is
Jr.
glamorous, and that's and that's the premise. The premise here is like this interesting actor, but that has a very strange energy that you don't maybe see in a lot of major movies anymore.
And the correct level of fame too.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right,
like he's not.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. They're not choosing exactly like Tom Cruise or something like that.
Well, it's funny you say that because I believe if you go to the Wikipedia page for being John Malkovich and some of the early feedback he got from people in Hollywood is apparently somebody at one point said, why couldn't it be being Tom Cruise?
Because that's not the point. Yeah, it wouldn't work.
Yes.
Also, he has a weird energy that I think works perfectly for this. I love his performances specifically.
It must be closed for the love of God. when he gets out of his own head. Yeah, honestly, I think that hour 50 or hour 40, however long it is worth it for the 2 minutes when he's in his own head. That's just an all-time sequence. I love it.
It's super enjoyable.
Yes. So speaking of being John Malkovich and speaking of actually that scene, that kind of is a necessary bridge to talk about Adaptation, which is our film to remember today, because the Adaptation opens on the set of Being John Malkovich, actually filming the scene where he goes into his own head and there's Malkoviches everywhere. And that's also where you gotta kind of start talking as like the origin of Adaptation itself. Okay, so backing up. So Adaptation and Being John Malkovich were both written by Charlie Kaufman, both directed by Spike Jonze. Had the same cinematographer, which was Lance Accord, same editor, which was Eric Zunbrunnen. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And the same composer by the great and somehow Oscarless Carter Burwell, who's the longtime collaborator of the Coen Brothers and Martin McDonagh, and just written some just banger scores and somehow doesn't want an Oscar. So same creative team across the board between Adaptation and Being John Malkovich. And so I've read, the origin of Adaptation was Charlie Kaufman was actually trying to adapt the book The Orchid Thief, was struggling with writer's block, which is something we see in this movie, and he had a crazy idea where instead of making it just a movie about the Orchid Thief, it's a movie about him writing the Orchid Thief, and he brought this idea to Spike Jonze while they were making Being John Malkovich, and Spike Jonze was like, hey, good idea, you should pursue that, and, see what happens, and then what happens is they made Adaptation, and Charlie Kaufman was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. Charlie Kaufman said of Spike Jonze, had he said I was crazy, I don't know what I would have done. And he also said, I really thought I was ending my career by turning that in, being the script. So we can thank Spike Jonze, I guess, for encouraging Charlie Kaufman to pursue this wacky idea. So actual boilerplate stuff about the movie, as I alluded, it is adapted kind of from the book The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean, but backing up further, John LaRoche was a real guy who was arrested for orchid poaching in Florida in 1994. Susan Orlean is an actual writer who wrote a profile on John LaRoche for The New Yorker in January 1995 in an article called Orchid Fever. Then she expanded that New Yorker profile into a nonfiction book called The Orchid Thief, which was released in 1998. And either the article or the book or both were optioned by, I guess, Paramount. Paramount to be made into a movie, and they, at some point in the late 90s, hired Charlie Kaufman to adapt the book, and he struggled to do so, and his solution to his writer's block was to write himself into his screenplay, and so now the movie is both a story about John LaRoche, but also a story about Susan Orlean writing about John LaRoche, but also a story about Charlie Kaufman writing about Susan Orlean writing about John LaRoche. So, a hall of mirrors, if you will. I've used the term with a past and future guest, friend of the show, TJ Keeley. I've used the term a movie's up its own ass before, and he doesn't really know what I mean. This is what I mean. This is exactly what I mean when I say a movie's up its own ass. It is.
But in this case, literally.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a...
I mean, this movie does like document its own creation. Like there are many scenes where Charlie Kaufman, who is again a character in this movie, played by Nic Cage, is writing a screenplay and like narrating it as he writes it, and everything that he writes is at some point a scene in the movie. Yeah. I think without exception, I'm pretty sure. So apparently Tom Hanks was in conversation to play Charlie and Donald Kaufman. John Turturro was approached to play John LaRoche, but they ended up going with Nic Cage for the Kaufman twins and Chris Cooper for LaRoche. And apparently there's a long list of people to possibly play Robert McKee, and Robert McKee himself suggested Brian Cox, and that's why Brian Cox plays Robert McKee in a role that I really, really enjoy. We can talk about that later. Susan Orlean, I love this quote. She said that reading the screenplay, quote, was a complete shock. My first reaction was absolutely not. They had to get my permission. I just said, no, are you kidding? This is going to ruin my career. Very wisely, they didn't pressure me. They told me that everybody else had agreed, and I somehow got emboldened. It was certainly scary to see the movie for the first time. It took a while for me to get over the idea that I had been insane to agree to it, but I love the movie now. And if you watch this, I commiserate. I understand why Susan Orlean would be hesitant to sign off on it, because I think Meryl Streep's portrayal of her is really good, but it's also largely fictitious, and you know, there's some stuff that I wouldn't want mine associated with.
Yeah, for sure.
Movie was ultimately
I feel
released.
like the movie still has a sense of playfulness with everything that it does, so it doesn't feel as self-serious. Like, I don't know, if I think I can. You can tell the movie is writing itself as it happens, and so what happens doesn't seem to be as impactful for the real world characters, I guess, for the real world people it's based on. You know what I mean?
And you can also kind of also feel where the reality of what happened with Susan Orlean and John LaRoche in real life, you can see the point where Charlie Kaufman's making it up.
Yeah.
Like there,
kind of.
It fits. Like, it's a logical progression in the story. Like, so it's not coming out of left field or anything, but you can still kind of tell, like, okay, this is where the break from reality is, at least from my perspective.
For sure, but I also think there's some stuff before the very clear break from reality that she might object to. Her portrayal possibly. I don't know. I mean, I get it. Movie was ultimately released December 6, 2002, in very limited release. It was only released on 7 screens. Expanded a few times. It never got any wider than 672 screens, sometime in like February of 2003, I assume around when the Oscar nominations came out. But it ultimately made $32 million at the box office against a budget of $19 million, and that's split between 22 domestic and 10 international. So, I mean, it did fine, but like that's not very good, honestly.
Yeah.
But it was nominated at the Oscars for Best Actor for Nic Cage, Best Supporting Actress for Meryl Streep, Best Supporting Actor for Chris Cooper, which he won, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And notably, the screenplay is credited to written as screenplay by Charlie Kaufman and Donald Kaufman. So Donald Kaufman was actually nominated for an Oscar, even though he does not exist. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, he's the only fictional person to ever be nominated for an Oscar. And I do know that the Academy specifically said that if the Kaufman twins are to win, they will have to share one statue they will not get to. very, very cheeky and funny. Also, this is a bit of an inside baseball, but I may have explained this before, but when you see multiple writers credited on a screenplay, if there's an ampersand used, that means they collaborated. If there's an A&D used, that means they did not collaborate and just wrote 2 separate drafts, but both contributed enough to the final script that they deserve credit. Oh, okay. This is an A&D credit. So this is Charlie Kaufman, A&D Donald Kaufman, which, as we'll discuss, makes sense given what the screenplay ultimately is. So I thought that was, like, I didn't notice that until this most recent watch. I thought that was very fun.
So even the credits of the movie are meta.
Yes. Also,
fantastic.
Not to get into spoilers or anything, but this movie is dedicated to the memory of Donald Kaufman. If you watch to the end of the credits, which I thought was interesting and funny. So briefly, I wanted to ask you guys what your history with this movie was. I think you guys were both seeing it for the first time, but I can talk about my history if you like. But I also want to know your relationship to Charlie Kaufman's work, and I'll start with Hugo.
I did see this for the first time this week. The first movie that I saw from Charlie Kaufman, as I think written by Charlie Kaufman, which I think is probably the one that most people have seen, is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I saw a few years, quite a few years ago. Then, I guess years later, I watched Being John Malkovich, and then I watched I've Been Thinking of Ending Things. And if you recall an episode from last year, I didn't really like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and I guess that's why I never actually went and watched some other stuff written by Kaufman. But then I watched Adaptation and Synecdoche this week, which I both... I did enjoy Adaptation more, but I think both were really worth watching, really interesting projects. And I'm actually back on board. I'm looking forward to anything he writes next in a way that I wasn't before.
I think you would like Anomalisa.
Yeah, I think I'm also going to watch Anomalies at this point. Yeah. Even just for completion's sake, I've seen all of them. Might as well.
I think I'm Thinking of Ending Things is also very, very dense. I've watched that 2 or 3 times now, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything it's doing. There's a lot to unpack, an awful lot to unpack. So it's.
I just think that movie. I don't know. The original story it's based on is such a pulpy thing, and
it is.
And he turns it into something that it isn't, but you can tell it's coming from that. And I feel like you could condense it a little bit and do something a little, not necessarily more straightforward. In some ways, you could make it even less, coherent and comprehensible. But in some ways, I think it would work better for me, at least.
Sure.
It's a long movie.
Grizz.
It goes on.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's basically it's 4 scenes too.
Yeah,
it's long.
exactly.
It's over 2 hours. It's 4 scenes pretty much. It's wild. Sorry, Grizz, go ahead. What's your relationship to this movie and or Kaufman's work?
So as we had talked about, we had talked about a little bit Being John Malkovich last week when we were preparing for this. We had talked about how for some reason Being John Malkovich was a movie that just was on TV a lot when I was younger, and I still don't know why it was on TV as often as it was, because it does seem like a very
I don't either.
niche film, but it was on often enough that I watched parts of this movie multiple times over the years, and it wasn't until this week that I finally watched it beginning to end, so that I could form a coherent opinion on a fairly incoherent movie in terms of what the heck is happening. But it was a lot of fun. And Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I think, is the other one I've seen from Charlie Kaufman before Adaptation, and I really, really enjoy that movie. I think it's excellent, and it is. I love that movie as an example of comedic actors showing their chops, right? Because some of them are able to make that jump, and others aren't. And Jim Carrey does an excellent job in that one. But other than that, I don't have that much attachment to Charlie Kaufman. So I think that kind of made this an interesting week for me because, and we'll get more into it, but when we're watching Adaptation, I'm the whole time is he like this? Is this really, is this him? Or is he making a version of him that he thinks is humorous?
Right. So I want to actually have a section in the outline because I want to talk about that because his portrayal of himself is not very generous, and he's not a very rosy self-depiction, but also the Donald character, given that he's fictional, is interesting in a. Yeah, right. I'm kind of curious as to the fact that he made him a twin brother is an interesting choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that, especially in a movie where he's writing himself as a character and then gives himself a twin brother that doesn't actually exist, is an interesting choice. And I kind of wanted to unpack that a little bit. Also, full disclosure, my headphones kind of disconnected while you're talking, so I missed most of your answer there. But I came back in as you were talking about Jim Carrey, so I'm assuming you're talking about Eternal Sunshine, and not the Grinch for some reason. That I don't know
if you went off the rails. To Charlie Kaufman is that I think he is a lot like the Grinch, which reminds me of Jim Carrey.
Okay, so I'm sorry I can't respond directly to what you just said, but I will give my own history with the movie, which is and I guess Charlie Kaufman in general. I first saw. Like Hugo, Eternal Sunshine, just because I was a little too young when Malkovich came out and Adaptation came out, but I was pretty much the right age when Eternal Sunshine came out, and so I saw that first, and I think that's a good entry point into his stuff because it's it's got broad appeal with Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey, and it won an Oscar, and it's a a romance, but it's also very cerebral. It takes place literally inside somebody's head, which is not the first time he wrote a movie that takes place inside somebody's head.
Realistically,
but
it's
I think
the
that's
third
like
time he's written a movie taking place inside someone's head.
Yes, I mean, probably more than half most of his movies, either literally or in a very overt figurative sense, take place inside somebody's head. So it's kind of his shtick. But yeah, I think that's a good. I think Eternal Sunshine's a good entry point. I wouldn't say it has broad appeal is maybe the wrong word, but it is more accessible, I think, than even John Malkovich or Adaptation.
I think you can enjoy the movie on a surface level. I think more.
Yes.
Compared to some of the other films he wrote, where you have to really unpack and try to understand what the movie's doing, and if you just take it literally, it just falls apart. It doesn't matter. But that's not the point.
Speaking of unpacking. The next thing I saw was Synecdoche, and I sought that out because I know how much Ebert loved it, and also because I have to say, friend of the show, TJ Keeley loved it. We were in high school together at the time, or like just finishing up high school, and like he really sang that movie's praises when it came out, and still does, and so that convinced me to watch it, and that was kind of a sliding doors moment of like I saw that at the right time, at the right age, and it really had a very profound effect on me. And so I remember I was working at like this summer school at the time, and I brought in the DVD of Synecdoche because I think I was like, we were giving movie recommendations to coworkers and everything. And one of my coworkers said, I think Charlie Kaufman peaked with Adaptation when I was talking about Synecdoche. And I'd never heard of Adaptation. I hadn't seen it. But because he said that, I'm like, wow, I mean, I thought Eternal Sunshine was pretty good. And I think the Synecdoche is pretty good. So if you think he peaked with Adaptation, I got to check this out. And I did. And it was among my favorite movies now. I really, really enjoy this. I think I saw Being John Malkovich after this, which is not ideal because that's not ideal. But I can't remember that. Maybe I'd seen like parts of Malkovich.
That would make the scene at the beginning while they're shooting it and they're like hunching it through the hallway of the set. That would be so confusing.
Yeah, it's definitely not required, but it is immensely helpful if you've seen Being John Malkovich before you see Adaptation. And then after that, I'm in from that point. I haven't seen Human Nature, which is a movie that he made with Michel Gondry before Eternal Sunshine. I've seen part of it. Extremely weird movie. The part I've seen, Hilary Duff's in it for like 20 seconds. Sure. Either pre or right around Liz McGuire, Hilary Duff, which is bizarre. But yeah, Anomalisa I saw as soon as I could when it came out, and afterwards I had to walk around the sidewalk by myself for like 20 minutes just to process it. And I really enjoyed I'm Thinking of Ending Things. But it is,
Anomalisa is a stop motion, right?
It is stop motion, yeah. And it's also a very weird movie, but in I think, a good way.
Charlie Kaufman appears to have at least a minor obsession with puppetry.
Well, so I can't pronounce his last name, but the guy who plays Starburns on Community, Dino Stenanopoulos, something Greek, I apologize.
Yeah.
He is like he and Kaufman were in the same circles in the 90s. I think he made the show Moral Oral, I'm pretty sure, which is like an animated show, like an adult animation
Kaufman
show.
Wrote an episode of that.
Yeah, so Kaufman, like, before he started writing features, was in like those writers' rooms, and again in that orbit of Dino, sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, Starburns from Community, who is again like in the stop motion world and that kind of thing. And actually, I think he wrote Anomalisa. I think was supposed to originally just be like a radio play that he wrote for like a show that his friends were putting on, and then ended up like making that into a stop motion feature from the radio play that he wrote, which is interesting because Anomalisa has a lot of characters but only 3 voice actors, which is a intentional choice in the movie. You have the main character voiced by David Lewis, and you have the Anomalisa character voiced by Jennifer Jason Leigh, and then every other character is voiced by Tom Noonan. And again, that's a thematic and plot choice, which if you watch the movie will make sense. Good movie. So yeah, sorry, Adaptation. Like I said, I really enjoy this. One of my favorite movies. I'm glad you guys got to see it. And I wanted to, I think, starting the discussion, I want to talk about what I think is kind of the hook of the movie, which is the meta aspect. Is that fair to say that's the hook of the movie?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, the meta aspect being, as I already said, it is ostensibly a movie that is an adaptation of The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean, and it is kind of that to an extent, but it's really about the process of adapting the Orchid Thief itself. So again, the movie documents its own creation, which I think is clever and fun. But some people might find that tiresome. Where are you guys at on the meta stuff? I eat that shit up. So where are you guys at?
Who do you want to go first?
Grizz.
Well, I'll tell you, I found it very interesting, but also very distracting because it became very clear that it was. I mean, just from the premise, this is going to be a meta sort of film because it's about the adaptation of an article, and so just knowing that initial premise, it's going to be a little. I want to say navel gazing, but that's not exactly the right thing.
It's very much navel gazing.
Yeah, you think that fits? Because normally when people do navel gazing, it's self-aggrandizing, and that they think it's very pro self. Like the person who's doing it is thinking very highly of themselves. But Charlie Kaufman is not thinking very highly of himself in this movie. That's why I'm not sure it's the exact right word. But in any case, I find myself watching the movie, and then I start to think about the real Charlie Kaufman, and then I start thinking about like what parts are like true to character of himself, and what's something he's done for the movie, and then also not knowing that his brother didn't exist.
You didn't know that going in?
Didn't know that going in. So,
okay.
But then, like as the movie progressed, I started to think, well, God, if this guy was writing, if he was also becoming a screenwriter, I feel like I would have heard about him at some point.
My genre is thriller. What's yours? I love that line so much.
So I end up kind of like finding myself drifting off in my own head, thinking about what's going on in Charlie Kaufman's head, which to some extent is the point of the movie. So
absolutely, yeah.
I found that very, very interesting, but it is again at the end of it all. Tiresome is the right word, but in the wrong sense. I was exhausted at the end of the movie. But
yeah. I mean, I just referenced Community. There is a line in Community in season 2 at one point where Yvette Nicole Brown says, some people don't like movies about movies about movies. I mean, some of us got work in the morning. Damn, Charlie Kaufman. She actually evokes Charlie Kaufman's name, which says that and says, some of us have work in the morning, which makes me laugh when you say you are tired after watching this. So that makes sense.
So, but it's not like it's tiresome, like it's poorly done or it's too much. It's just that by the end, like your brain has been thinking nonstop for the entire run of the movie. And so it is like physically tiring.
You can arguably, to use a phrase I don't like, turn your brain off for the last 20 minutes, which is very much the point of the last 20 minutes. We can talk about that later on in the outline. Hugo, what do you think of the meta stuff in Adaptation?
I loved it.
Yeah, me too.
I love when a movie breaks the fourth wall. I love when I love when things are self-aware in many ways, just because I think I don't know, with a lot of movies, you can sometimes, even when they're really well made, you still can see what the movie is doing. You can tell it by, if we take Donald's words for it, which genre the movie is following, which tropes it's going for. And this always kept me guessing at what was going to happen next. I was always wondering, is this real? Is this something that the movie... Is this thing that he's writing now, is it actually going to happen in the movie? Did it happen in real life? Did it not happen in real life? And I understand how it can take you out and can get a little tiring, but to me, I found it really engaging. And what I especially liked about it was that I didn't think that it was taking itself that seriously, despite being so complex and so self-aware. I think it had, again, as I said before, a playfulness about it that never made it drag for me. Also, I just think the casting choices are so great, and every role is just really entertaining in its own way. When Donald first showed up, I was like, oh, maybe Charlie Kaufman sees himself talking to himself in real life, giving himself advice. And then it turns out he's actually a character in the movie. And at the beginning, I wasn't even sure whether he existed or not in the movie itself. The movie always kept me guessing at what was going to happen. And anytime there was like a line or something that specifically hinted at what was going to happen next, I got excited. Like there's specifically a moment when he is at the height of his like crisis and writer's block, when he goes to see this weird seminar that he'd made fun of before. And, not to spoil, but, the guy says, and never use voiceover.
God help if you use voiceover narration in your work, my friends. God help you.
And the voiceover stops. There's no voiceover for the next 40 minutes of the movie. I thought that's just that's genius. That's perfect. Yeah. So I really liked it.
Inside you, there are two wolves, Charlie Kaufman and Don Kaufman. Grizz, get your finger up. What are you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say part of what I think makes it so... The movie itself is self-aware, and I think the way that it achieves that degree of self-awareness is through Charlie Kaufman's own self-deprecating portrayal of himself. Because, this could get away from you and start to be too fantastical and too weird, but by making himself in the movie a neurotic mess, the movie can be as much of a neurotic mess as he wants it to be, because it helps bring back the humanity of Charlie Kaufman. I don't know. It's just it's odd.
Yeah.
There's always that grounding, that sort of emotional grounding that I think everyone can, in their own maybe smaller or different ways, relate to, of just being stuck on something and knowing you can do it, but at the same time not really knowing you can do it, not really believing in yourself, and thinking, I'm a mess, I'm a fraud, getting imposter syndrome, even though everyone's telling you, no, you're good, you know how to do this, you've got this, and you just go into like this weird existential crisis about everything. I think there's that emotional grounding that it's so relatable, that so even if the movie goes crazy places, you're still always interested in what it's doing.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about Charlie Kaufman more later, and like the choices he makes in depicting himself, but I want to talk about something else before that. Before we move on, though, I do want to say real quick to both of your points, Grizz, I think that this works because it is kind of self-deprecating, and like it's more tolerable because it's not as navel-gazing, to use your term. He's not self-aggrandizing at all, and like if he was, it would be, he does actually say, at the midpoint, he wrote himself into his own script. It's narcissistic, it's solipsistic, it's pathetic. Like those things are not true, but like it's more tolerable because he is self-deprecating. Yeah. I think that's probably fair to say. But before we get too far into Kaufman, I do want to talk a bit about like John LaRoche, like the story that he is ostensibly adapting here. So again, John LaRoche is a real guy, and he was written about by Susan Orlean, and she did write a book about him and about flowers and about, adaptation and Darwin, that kind of stuff. And like Kaufman did try to make that into a movie. So like, and there are parts of that in this, like, especially in the first hour, like, you do see John LaRoche in Florida with the Seminoles and that kind of stuff. Like, but as the character Charlie Kaufman says in this movie, that there's no story here. There's not enough for a full movie. Which is probably true, which is why the third act has to be what it is. But like, what did you guys think of the LaRoche part and the Orlean part before we get into the Kaufman part? Hugo, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's you summed it up perfectly when you mentioned what he says in the movie. There's not enough story there. That's not a movie. It's just kind of I think it's an interesting New Yorker article, and it might be an interesting book for people who are really interested in flowers. But to turn that story into a film I just don't see how you can do it. And I think the idea of being tasked with it and making something completely different, really, and way more interesting than that story, while also at the same time in some ways telling that story like he did.
Yeah.
If you cut out all the bits about John LaRoche, there's a good 30-minute movie about him, and maybe that's the amount of story that you had with that character.
I feel like I got it. Like, I feel like I got the John LaRoche story.
There really isn't a need for more. You don't need to have to, otherwise you'd have to, go to his childhood and show him being really into fish, and then he finds out, and then he's like, fuck fish.
And old Dutch mirrors and fish.
Yeah, it's
and,
like, that's
and internet pornography.
Yeah, it's just not really. I don't know. I don't think there's much there to. I don't know who tasked him with adapting the book, but it just didn't seem a good idea in the first place to me.
Tilda Swinton did, apparently.
Yeah, Tilda Swinton. Thank you, Tilda.
In this movie,
who's delightful in this as always.
Yes, she is very good in this.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting story, and I think it's an interesting article, and I think the way it's put into the movie and the way it's twisted and changed to serve what the movie is doing is really clever.
I'm going to disagree with you guys. I think there is a John LaRoche story to be told, and could be an entire feature film. I think that the reason that it appears that there isn't is because Charlie Kaufman is trying to illustrate his own thought process on it, which was that he didn't think there was enough story. So for the majority of the movie, that because we are seeing the movie that he is writing as it's being written, he is not writing a full story about John LaRoche because he doesn't think there is enough there. But if you look at the bones of John LaRoche's story, we can see that there's movies that can be made out of that. The whole story with his wife and the accident and the depression that could come after that, and how that affected his life goals and everything. The storm that destroyed his nursery. These are all climactic events that could be done in a movie, and I think it's definitely possible that you could have had a full movie just about this story. But
when you explain it that way, I feel like Robert Zemeckis could make that movie.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I was literally thinking of a Forrest Gump type, scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I wanted to say about that was, and the reason I definitely think that is because I think it's a lesson that Charlie Kaufman learns in the movie from Robert McKee. Because he goes in, he's like, well, I'm trying to tell this story about a movie where nothing really happens because because that's the way life is, and he's like, nothing really happens, and then he goes off on him, and that's the lesson there is no, there was stuff happening to this guy all the time.
Yes.
So that's my view.
That's
on
a really good point.
The LaRoche portion of the movie.
Yeah, and I do really enjoy the LaRoche stuff. I as I say here in the outline, his speech to Susan Orlean about insects and flowers and how they are designed to, as use his term, for the insect to make love to this flower and then pollinate it and do their little dance, as he says. That's a really, really beautiful speech and
it's fantastic,
thought provoking. Yeah,
I wanted to know, was that speech something that Charlie Kaufman wrote? This is another one where my mind went off. Did Charlie Kaufman write that speech, or was that something that was written in The Orchid Thief that John LaRoche actually said? And so I kind of want to go read the book or read the article and learn more about it, because that speech really was that spoke to me. I was like, wow, flowers really are a miracle, and this is what Charlie Kaufman was trying to tell, and he told it right there. That was it.
Yes, yeah.
I also think that speech is just a great piece of writing, in the sense that I always love when a movie is able to present a character that initially is ridiculous, weird, kind of unattractive, and he seems to be really weirdly into things that you don't understand, and then the movie flips it on you and is able to make this person really fascinating. I think that's always very, very good. I enjoy that.
There's a lesson,
and especially because
there.
It is a lesson in judging people, and it's also it also puts you in the shoes of Susan Orlean, who initially just thinks, "Oh, this guy is nuts."
She's the point of view character for that speech.
Yeah,
yes.
when he's explaining all the way his brain works and the way he views the world, he becomes fascinating to us in the same moment that he becomes fascinating to her, which I think is really well done.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to what Grizz was asking, whether that was written for the movie or in the article, I don't really know, but it wouldn't surprise me if Kaufman wrote it, given how well it's integrated into this is 3 stories. It's the story of John LaRoche and Orchid Hunter. It's the story of Susan Orlean, a writer who is becomes kind of fascinated by LaRoche and becomes passionate about finding a passion, basically, because LaRoche is a very passionate person. She admires that in him and wants to feel passionate herself. And then the third portion of the story is obviously a guy with writer's block related to all 3 of these. But the way they play off each other is very interesting. The fact that I'm sure I don't know how much of the Orlean stuff is actually in The Orchid Thief, how much she talks about wanting to care about something passionately, as she says, but that works really well for me, and how much the Orlean character relates to the LaRoche character, relates to the Kaufman characters, and him kind of reflecting on both of them. it all fits together really well, and I think that's really good.
My assumption is anytime we have voiceover by Meryl Streep, that's probably directly from the book, but
you probably
could be wrong.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Yes. I mean, do you guys, of the three stories I just said, the idiosyncratic orchid hunter, the writer in search of passion, and then the screenwriter with writer's block, which of those three did you like the most?
I mean,
Grizz.
the writer.
They're all incredible. Like, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
I would have watched any individual movie about any of those things, honestly.
Nice.
And the fact that it is all three at once is a triumph in screenwriting. So I like
it. What I kind of noticed on this most. First of all, I watched this movie a lot, like 8 or 9 years ago, and I have not watched it since then. So this is the first time I've watched it in a long time, and I kind of forgot how much it jumps around in the first like half hour or so. It jumps between timelines and which character you're following, but like never really feels disjointed to me, and like it kind of runs the risk of doing that. But like I don't know, I think it fits together pretty well.
I think the editing is fantastic because it's always the next scene always informs your thoughts on the previous scenes and vice versa. And even though it's jumping around between different stories, it always works.
I was going to say I almost didn't need the 3 years later or whatever the timeline in the future. I almost didn't need that on the screen because I really do feel like the editing was done well enough that I always knew what timeline we were in, even without they didn't need to show it on the screen for me to know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they eventually dropped that, but also like seeing Susan Orlean fly to Miami to see LaRoche, letting you know that is in the past versus happening right now, I think is an important distinction they make. But also the fact that Charlie Kaufman and Don Kaufman are following her indicates that you're in the present day and no longer 3 years ago. I guess so. I guess you're right. Oh, okay. So there are 3 Oscar-nominated performances here: Nic Cage, Chris Cooper, Meryl Streep. Chris Cooper actually won. What do you guys think of the performances? Hugo, go.
I think they're fantastic. I think this is, when you manage to, take Nic Cage and put him in a position to be great, he's great. Like he's one
so
of the
good in this.
He's one of the great actors at playing these weird idiosyncratic characters. Like whenever he gets the right part for him, he's just captivating, I think, and I also think the performance by Meryl Streep is incredible. Just because there's something about Meryl Streep; she's able to exude just this sense of complete innocence, and then the fact that she is so innocent and so pure, and then the movie turns that on you is so clever. Like by the end,
there's some menace, though. Yeah, there's some menace.
She's menacing by the end. She's a completely different. She goes through that change, and the movie kind of takes your I don't know how it was in 2002 because I was 6, but takes your sort of preconception of what Meryl Streep is and who Meryl Streep is and turns it on you, because that initial performance is so innocent and so she's sweet, she's clever, she's intelligent, but she's almost unassuming in some ways.
Yes.
But by the end she's such a completely, there's a shift that she does so well. There's that moment where she's just tired and goes, we have to kill him, very quietly.
That moment right there. So I have in the outline.
Excellent. Yeah.
I have in the outline that there are some moments in this movie that I think are some of the best pieces of acting I've ever seen Meryl Streep do, and that exact moment is one of them where
so good.
the camera holds on her for about 10 or 15 seconds. She doesn't say anything, but like you see in her eyes as she's processing their situation, and like she starts to tear up. She starts to look around. She kind of like covers her own mouth because like by the shock of what she's about to say. And then like you just said, she says very softly, "We have to kill him." And it's such a great piece of acting.
Yeah,
it's like honestly one of my favorite things I've ever seen her do. And like a small moment. I'm so glad you called that out because I was going to as well. Yeah. Also, the scene where she gets high for the first time and calls John LaRoche. I really like that. I like that scene a lot too. And I'm sorry, Grizz, go ahead.
Well, so on the topic of Meryl Streep, I think for the most part, because she's such a prolific actress and we've seen her in countless movies, she's kind of become a larger-than-life figure herself. And so in especially in recent years, a lot of her movies, I find it that they tend to have a similar character trait of being a large presence in every scene. Whatever she's doing on screen, Meryl Streep is the focus in because
she has become stunt casting to some extent recently, I think.
Yeah, well, because she's a draw. She's but I was what makes this so refreshing is that I do really feel like, especially at the beginning of the movie, she's almost small, right? Like she's unassuming. She's and obviously this was a while ago in her career, but Meryl Streep was already a big name by the time this movie came out, and so it was just kind of fun to see that part of her, where that she is able to not be the biggest presence in the scene. She's she's just a writer. She's an observer. She's trying to learn without affecting the way that a reporter does, right? And then as she becomes more passionate and more involved, you start to see that her presence builds until she does kind of build into a stronger personality, as we see at the end when she kind of has that moment where she's like, well, we have to kill them.
Yeah. While you're talking about that, while you're talking just now, like, I think you touched on something that she is a big presence, but I think you could probably draw a line in the sand of Meryl Streep's filmography and do pre and post Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah.
Because I think since The Devil Wears Prada, she's become like a bigger, somewhat stunt casting, possibly Hugo, like you said. But pre-Devil Wears Prada, I think it was more... I mean, she's been doing stellar work for decades before Devil Wears Prada, but like, I think that was like a kind of a changing of the guard and like the kind of roles that she had, and like her presence on screen at least.
I think that's the kind of moment that she there's only so many actors and actresses that reach that point, and I think it's like her and Tom Hanks are kind of like they're just there's that point where they hit their career. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter where you have them in the billing, they're the most important person in this movie.
Yeah, and Tom Hanks hit that early on.
He hit that early on, yeah.
I also want to say, so Nic Cage, I read this most recent time, I was just reading up on this movie. Apparently he didn't didn't really follow his instincts in this movie. He just apparently just played it exactly how Spike Jonze told him to play it, and like kind of just... First of all, he's a very talented actor. I'm a big Nic Cage fan. You won't hear me bad-mouthing him at all, but like, apparently he's just like a very professional guy by all accounts. Like, he's a pro. He's acting as a 9-to-5 job, and like, he's a team player is what I mean. He no ego at all. Just he's there to make a movie, and he's collaborative, and like, I think that is indicative. The fact that he just like went along with however Spike Jonze directed him to perform. Like, I think that's indicative of a guy who just, again, is collaborative and doesn't have ego or anything like that.
And he ended up being nominated for better or for worse. I think he's a guy that, for better or for worse, gives himself to every performance and
absolutely
gives it his all.
We love him for that.
Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's not, but it's always in an endearing way. And I think at his best, he's one of the great actors.
It's impressive that he can not have an ego, given his success, but also just given his lineage in terms of Hollywood history. Mm-hmm. He's a Coppola. He's a
Coppola. Yeah,
that's and to go into his entire career, he's been Nic Cage, right? Like, did he ever have a credit with his actual last name?
If he did, it was like early '80s, I would think. So I'm not really sure.
Before he became anything to talk about, really. And so, like, despite his lineage, I do feel like he's earned his place himself, which it can be really tough to do, especially when you have a lineage in the industry.
But I love him in this. I mean, I think it's like he's got to play two polar extremes, and I think he plays both really, really well. And like, honestly, I sometimes kind of take for granted it's the same guy playing Donald and Charlie, which doesn't make sense because they're identical, but like, they're such different performances and such different energies. Like, he really does sell you they're two distinct people, which I think is really impressive.
I wanted to say on that note, while I was watching the movie, my dad came downstairs to get something out of the fridge, and he stopped and watched just a little bit of the movie. And the performance between the two of them is so dynamically different. My dad actually, for a second, didn't realize that they were both Nic Cage.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so I have in the outline more about Donald, so I'm going to put a pin in that conversation real quick and just circle back to Chris Cooper, who, again, won Best Supporting Actor Oscar for this. I really like him in this. Again, like, he's got some really great quotes that I still say a lot to, my friends, whether it be "That's a much fuck fish" or that speech about, pollinating flowers we already talked about. Just great stuff. I don't know if, like, I think he's like, but the least dynamic performance of the three, though. Like, it's interesting that he won the Oscar. I'm not sure who he was up against that year, but like, I think Cage is better, and I think Streep is better. But I like him in this. What do you guys think, Hugo? What do you think of Chris Cooper in this?
I don't know. I think I noticed him less, and when doing research on the movie afterwards, I was kind of surprised that he was also nominated and won. Not that he's not. I mean, I think he's really good, but I found so much to relate to in the Charlie character and in the Susan character that I, could relate to on a very human, basic level on stuff that I go through in my everyday life. That him, in some ways, being the more straightforward performance while also being the most larger than life character, just didn't. I didn't connect to it as much. He didn't stand out as much to me. Even though I thought he was really good, but it wasn't my focus, I guess, in the movie.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. Grizz, go ahead.
Well, so first I was going to say, I looked it up. The other people who were nominated for Best Actor in Supporting Role that year were Christopher Walken in Catch Me If You Can. Which
so good.
Fantastic.
So good.
Ed Harris in The Hours, John C. Reilly in Chicago, and Paul Newman in Road to Perdition. So, like, a really pretty stellar group of guys here for this.
I don't think Cooper should have won that, honestly. As much as I love this movie, that's a tough.
The only
crowd.
argument I could make for why I would justify his winning is that this is the supporting role, right? And you could make arguments, at least for what I've seen, like especially Christopher Walken in Catch Me If You Can. That role is so important and there's moments in the movie where Christopher Walken is the lead of those scenes, if you know what I mean. I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to find a justification. I hate when you roll your eyes at me like that, Josh.
Christopher Walken is very much supporting. In
I know he's in the whole movie. I'm saying there are scenes where that Christopher Walken.
I think there are scenes that LaRoche leads in this, though.
Yeah.
I think you can make the same argument.
Yeah, I think you probably
Okay, here's something. I think this didn't really occur to me until this most recent watch, but I'm wondering if this is a makeup Oscar for American Beauty 3 years earlier. Because Chris Cooper, I don't even know if he was nominated for supporting actor in American Beauty, but he should have been. I think that is a much more. I don't know if I should say it's a much more interesting performance, but I think he's very good in that. That is a more traditional Oscar kind of performance than this one. So I wonder if that was like a makeup Oscar. I believe he lost, again, I'm not sure if he was nominated, but if he was, he would have lost to Michael Caine in Cider House Rules for supporting actor in 1999. Michael Caine. Another 2002 Oscar fact. So Nic Cage lost Best Actor to, I believe, Adrien Brody for The Pianist. And I believe Adrien Brody is the first person to win an Oscar where everyone else in the category had already won an Oscar, because he was up against, this is going off the dome, I'm not looking at anything. I believe he's up against...
I'm reading it, so I'll fact check.
Jack Nicholson in About Schmidt, who had already won 2 for One Flew Cuckoo's Nest and As Good as It Gets. He was up against Michael Caine, who had already won for Hannah and Her Sisters, and, as I just mentioned, Cider House Rules. He was up against Nic Cage, who already won for Leaving Las Vegas. And he was up against...
you can do this.
Oh, Daniel Day-Lewis for Gangs of New York. Yes, who had already won for My Left Foot. Woo! Yes.
And would go on to win twice.
He would go on to win 2 more times for There Will Be Blood and Lincoln. So that's a little Oscar factoid.
What I was going to say...
I mean, another pretty stacked category, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
When Adrien Brody is like the least celebrated actor on your list, then...
I just wanted to double back to Chris Cooper just real quick. What the argument I was going to make is that this is a great example of a supporting role. I don't think he overpowers any of the other characters or any scene and so I think it's a great encapsulation of what it is to be a supporting actor. So I was gonna say that's my justification, but of course, I'm going to agree with you. Christopher Walken, Catch Me If You Can is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Me too, man.
I want Christopher Walken.
I freaking love that movie, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I said I want to talk more about Donald, and I do. So let's pivot to that. I think it's an interesting choice, to write yourself into your own movie, because then it immediately becomes like a reflective thing. Like, what does this writer think of himself, in how he portrays himself, how he writes himself. And then he gives himself a twin brother. And I think it's, again, as I said earlier, it's interesting he gave himself a twin brother and not just like, there's any number of ways to accomplish the plot mechanics of what needs to happen here. But the fact that it's a twin brother, I think, is speaks more about the self-reflection happening here. And so, like, what do you guys think of the Donald of it all? Like, why is he included as a character? Like, what's his purpose? What can we deduce about Charlie Kaufman, how he sees himself based on the Donald Kaufman character? Let's start with Grizz. What do you think of Donald?
I think that Donald Kaufman serves a narrative requirement for this sort of movie, in that Charlie needs someone to be jealous of. He needs someone to be judgmental of, and so
a yin to his yang.
Yeah, the yin to his yang. What better way to do that than a twin brother? That way, you can also use your own personality. If you're Charlie Kaufman, you can write aspects of yourself into Donald, and you can write aspects of yourself into the Charlie of the movie, and get that juxtaposition. And I think it serves the movie really well to have that person for him to bounce off of and to butt heads with, and in the best way, because Donald is I just love Donald. Like, he's such a carefree guy that, like, maybe he's a little bit of a screw up historically in his life, but he just perseveres, and he's got a smile on his face, and he thinks he can do it.
My favorite thing about Donald as well is, like, no matter how poorly Charlie treats him, he's always nice to Charlie. Like, he loves his big brother. He loves his brother, and he's always there for him regardless. Like, which is just
McKee's a former Fulbright scholar. Are you a former Fulbright scholar, Charles?
Yeah.
And I love that he always calls him Charles.
Yes, yeah.
It's funny.
My genre is thriller. What's yours? Yeah, I love the Donald character. Hugo, you go ahead about the Donald character.
For me, it's like, in some ways, it's real life Charlie Kaufman telling himself to maybe relax a little and get out of his own, like, genius mind, and maybe not think too highly of himself sometimes. While at the same time, it's also him reflecting on, yes, but still, I don't want to write a genre. I do want to do something unique. So it's sort of that weird balance that he has to ride, where don't get too full of yourself, while also not giving into commercialism directly. And the way the movie addresses it then as a whole with the story, I think, is fantastic as well, because it does turn more commercial, but it serves the purpose of trying not to be commercial, which I think is really clever. Also, he's fun. There's also something
Very
about
fun.
that, because, like, Charlie in the movie, and I don't know how he is in real life, is miserable. Even though him being miserable is self-deprecating, and it's entertaining as well. The Donald character brings some levity to that I think is needed, because otherwise you could get a little bogged down in how just depressed this guy is.
Grizz, you got a finger up. What do you got?
I withdraw that finger.
Okay, you withdraw the finger. Okay, withdraw. Record show. Grizz withdraws his finger. Yeah, I mean, I have this later in the outline, but we can kind of talk about it now. Is like, I think that he is, the Donald Kaufman character, I think, is self-criticism of Charlie Kaufman. Like, he's kind of making fun of himself and, like, again, offering a counterbalance to his self-serious nature and his neuroticism by having a different version of himself that is the opposite of neurotic and the opposite of self-serious. But I also think he's a stand-in for... So he's a stand-in for self-criticism of Charlie Kaufman himself, but it's also a stand-in for criticism of the industry. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Donald Kaufman writes a thriller called The Three, and as Charlie Kaufman says in the movie, it's a little obvious, it's a little overdone, but it ends up, like, apparently selling for high sixes against Mill 5, according to Donald Kaufman. And, oh, by the way, I love Ron Livingston as the agent. He's so good as the agent. I can't repeat a lot of the things he says in the movie, but
that was the funniest moment in the movie, though, because this guy is just having an identity crisis. And he's like, "Oh, you know that girl? Yeah, I did that." And I was like,
Well, excellent. I mean, again, that character is also part and parcel with the criticism of the industry, in that, like, he's so wowed by the incredibly obvious and frankly dumb script that Donald writes.
Yeah.
It's like machine versus horse. But also, but it is like a philosophical difference between the two. This movie, I think, ultimately, and the point of the Charlie Donald dynamic is about compromise, and whether Charlie has these high-minded ideals of telling a true story about flowers that isn't Hollywoodized, to use that term, and Donald is in the business of writing a taut thriller that's entertaining and commercial. And then this movie is ultimately a marriage of those two philosophies, in a literal sense, because the first 2/3 is the high-minded ideals, and the last third is the taut Hollywood thriller of it all. And I wanted to ask you guys where you fall on that spectrum of Donald's philosophy versus Charlie's philosophy. Like, normally I'm more of a Charlie Kaufman person than a Donald Kaufman person, but I don't know, like, this movie wouldn't exist without the Donald of it all. Like, so you need both. What do you think, Grizz?
Well, I think we can tell just from our past discussions that I probably err a little more on the Donald side. It's not that I dislike the extremely heady stuff, but I also sometimes I do enjoy a movie where I don't have to exercise my brain, and you can talk about whether or not they're you can approach movie criticism the same way for those kind of movies, because obviously, if you're looking at Citizen Kane and you're comparing it to Avengers Endgame, it's safe to say that one of these movies is a bigger triumph in movie making history, and the other one is a bigger triumph in money making history.
Yes, it is. I was gonna say that. Yeah,
yeah, just a little bit.
So, but who's to say which one has more value, and who's to say which one does one of them not deserve to exist, right? I think there's a place for both, and I really do think that's ultimately what this movie shows you, is that you can marry the two, and they can exist separately, they can be married together, and you can still find some value in either of those things. So that's my view on it.
Hugo, where are you at on the Donald Charlie spectrum?
I think the movie itself is telling you that there is a balance. There can be a balance between the two.
Yeah.
It doesn't all have to be high art, and there is a way to write genre and pulp and make it, very, very, very good filmmaking, very good writing. Just look at the whole careers of people like David Fincher, Quentin Tarantino, like even the Coen brothers to some extent that work in. And I don't know if Charlie Kaufman is in some ways jealous of some of these. Not jealous in the sense of art, because I think he really believes in what he writes and what he does. But maybe he is in some ways annoyed by how successful maybe other writers of his time are.
I think he thinks that
do operate in genre.
I think he thinks that it might be easier for them.
Right,
that they're not dealing with the existential crisis that he's battling, because the way they're approaching their movies is easier to write. I think that may be where that is coming from.
Which might be true, but it might also not be true. I think it just kind of... I think everyone's process to their own work, regardless of what their own work is completely different and unique. And so you can't really make a broad stroke with that. But I think when you asked this question, it made me think of Charlie Kaufman as a whole, as the movies that I've seen written by him. I think anytime there's I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but I think when you work with no limitations, when your own voice is the voice, your writer, director, and sort of there's no pushback, and when you have such a creative genius like Kaufman, but also that is very high-minded and in some ways does think highly of itself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You do run the risk of just going too far and not having any limitation on what you're doing, which I guess is the whole meaning of the movie Synecdoche. Like, he's reflecting
that is the text. Yeah. That is the text of Synecdoche, New York.
Exactly. He's reflecting on his own creative mind and how it just can be limitless, and then maybe you overwhelming limitations, because otherwise you're just really not actually doing anything. But in some ways,
building a warehouse inside a warehouse inside a warehouse.
Exactly. But in some ways, I do feel like my favorite Kaufman movies are the ones where he does have creative partners, and you can obviously Adaptation very much Kaufman film, but Spike Jonze is a really good director that has to work
he's
with the
an
material.
essential collaborator. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And he has strong voice, as we can see, because he did very good, very successful movies with Kaufman, but he also worked without him and also had great ideas and did great movies on his own.
Won a screenplay Oscar of his own. Yeah,
exactly. So.
Yes.
I don't know. In some ways, I do think that him collaborating is when he's at his best. And Charlie in the character, Charlie in the movie, fictional Charlie, in some ways needs that collaboration with Donald to bring the movie to some sort of end, because he's written himself into a corner at one point, which is when his
Ouroboros.
which is when his crisis is at its highest point, because he hasn't told the story. He's just been self-deprecating for 2 hours and then thinking about the writing process and talking about himself, and as he it's self-aggrandizing. It's egocentric or whatever he says, and
it's narcissistic,
so
it's solipsistic.
Exactly.
It's
he needs that collaboration to bring the movie to a conclusion, both fictionally and in real life. So yes. I think there's always a balance to be stricken, and I think Kaufman, to some extent, agrees with that.
Well, I want to come back to him needing an ending, because that's later in the outline, but real quick, something you said at the start of that long spiel was about how you think that Charlie Kaufman might be jealous of writers like Donald Kaufman, and I mean, he says in the movie that, like, the Charlie Kaufman character says to Donald, I envy you, and he does, in the profound life lesson scene of the movie, which, again, we'll get to in a second. He envies his obliviousness, but then learns he's not actually that oblivious, or maybe not as oblivious as he first appears. He knows more. He's more self-aware than you might first assume. So you talked also, Hugo, about the ending and how Charlie Kaufman had to find his ending. This movie takes a very fun but very dramatic turn. About 40 minutes left, 30 minutes left. It's different tonally, it's different narratively. It's a real third act. So, what did you guys make of the third act, just in general? Grizz, what do you got?
So, we're referring to everything that takes place in Florida, or including Robert McKee's,
I think
speech.
So. What happened? So, okay, there's a time when, yes. So Charlie Kaufman goes to talk to Robert McKee, and Robert McKee says, "That's not a story. You need to go back and add the drama." And then he says, "The last act makes a film. You can have flaws, problems, but dazzle them in the end, and you've got a hit. So go find your ending." And then Charlie flies his brother Donald to New York, and Donald reads his script, and then Charlie says, "How would the great Donald end the script?" And I think from that point on,
that's the third act.
a script by Donald Kaufman, basically, quote unquote. So basically, your thing. Basically, finding out that LaRoche and Orlean are having an affair, and everything that continues on from that point. What do you think of all that stuff?
Well, I mean, it's certainly that's when it becomes a thriller, right? They fly, they get stuck, in their car, and a lot of kind of tropey aspects there, like peeking through the window, getting caught peeking through LaRoche's window while he and Susan Orlean are doing orchid drugs.
and each other. So I didn't notice this. I didn't notice to this most recent watch. This is produced by Jonathan Demme. Jonathan Demme is a producer on this movie, and that sequence was so Silence of the Lambsy as he's going through the greenhouse. I'm like, Demme's on this. That makes sense. Yeah,
but so it does become fun, and it does add a level of excitement that the movie didn't have before, which I think is, again, exactly what the point is here. So, which is also fun because not only are you trying to enjoy the movie, but you're also still thinking about the meta aspect of it all, about Charlie writing this. You start to ask yourself those questions again. It's like, okay, what parts are we stretching of the story here? And of course, all of it is the answer. It's all made up, but it's fun and it's exciting, and you get the heartfelt moments between Donald and Charlie that you didn't get in the rest of the movie. You don't get any emotional, real emotional attachment between them because Charlie is so, annoyed by his brother throughout the whole movie. And so we finally get in this ending some like, really good tug on your heartstrings moments.
Yes.
What's up?
So
what do you got, Josh?
Hugo, I want to ask your opinion too, but before I do that, I'm going to actually jump ahead in the outline. And I ask in the outline if you guys noticed when the movie calls it shot. Because it calls it shot several times with the ending. I already mentioned two of them. The first is Robert McKee saying you have to go back and have the drama because you don't have an ending here. So basically you have to make it up. And then Charlie says to Donald, how would Donald on the script? That's also calling it shot a second time. But it calls it shot in the opening scene when Charlie Kaufman has lunch with Valerie Thomas, played by Tilda Swinton, when he's talking about adapting the Orchid Thief. He says, and I quote, before this quote, he says, I don't want to like make the orchids into poppies and making a movie about drug running. And then he says, I'm quoting now, okay, but I'm saying it's like, I don't want to cram in sex or guns or car chases, or characters, learning profound life lessons or growing or come to like each other or overcoming obstacles to succeed in the end. I mean, the book isn't like that and life isn't like that, it just isn't. And I feel very strongly about this. Every single one of those things happens in the last half hour.
Everything in order as well.
Yes. So, again, he's calling his shot there.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. It's so fun, and I gotta say that impression you just did of Nic Cage.
I've seen
Charlie
it a lot.
Kaufman?
I've seen the movie a lot.
That was so good, Josh.
Thank you. So this third act is effectively sarcastic. It's a sarcastic third act, but like even knowing that this is like here's the stupid part of the movie, you idiots. Like that's basically what he's saying. Like it still works on
here's
me.
Your
like,
garbage. Eat your garbage.
Like, I mean, the profound life lesson scene where like Charlie has this heart-to-heart moment with Donald, and he learns that he's not actually oblivious. You are what you love, not what loves you, is the profound life lesson learned. Like that scene really works on me, even though I know that it's making fun of me for responding to it. And
it is, again, but at the same time, it's not, because it's still him reconciliating himself with himself. Like there's a side of himself that's like, maybe I don't have to be so up my own arse, and I can write something fun as well into this larger picture.
And we're also an hour 20 in, so we can get to spoilers and everything. But like Donald's death scene, it's really effective. Yeah. That really works on me. It's like a really, really sad scene, and that character doesn't exist. He's not a real person.
And
but,
he got me with a twist. A classic thriller trope twist where he gets shot and you think that's the moment that Donald's gonna die, but no, he's alive only to get thrown through a windshield, just like LaRoche's family earlier in the movie. And it gets you right in the gut.
Yeah, it's just really remarkable that again the whole final 30 minutes again is sarcastic, and it still works. Like I don't know, it worked. Hugo, what do you got on the last act?
There's also just on a very basic level something so almost whimsical about two Nic Cages running through like a swamp with Meryl
Streep, yeah,
with Meryl Streep with a shotgun chasing after
witnessing
them. Like,
Chris Cooper get killed by an alligator.
It's great. The movie manages to have its cake and eat it too, where it's sarcastic.
It really does, yeah.
But at the same time, it's so well made that it could be, if that was the movie, it would still be a good movie. And it just elevates it because it manages to comment on it while also making something cool with it.
That's what I was gonna say. Like we keep saying it's sarcastic, but I think somehow it's both. That it is sarcastic, exactly. But that also Charlie completely loves this scene. Like, I'm sure that real life Charlie Kaufman enjoys this part of the movie.
Well, the movie ends with him his voiceover saying like, "This is good. I like this," about his own script that he's finishing. Yeah. So.
And then Charlie drives away.
Yeah, this is good. I like this. Yeah. And he takes his profound life lessons and tells Kara Seymour that he loves her, or whatever the actress's name is, the violin player in this. Yeah. Good movie. Well, we covered the outline. Any final thoughts besides me saying good movie about Adaptation?
No, really good movie.
I do have one final
sooner.
We do always.
I do too. Yeah.
We do always focus on first shots of movies, but I want to focus on the very ending of the movie here, where we get the flowers on the street and the time lapse of the flowers, which is again what Charlie said he was setting out to do was to make
and
a movie
Happy Together playing,
about flowers. But he's got Happy Together, which is what Donald wanted in the movie the whole time. And we get both married perfectly. That this is right in this last shot. They're showing you the miracle of flowers, along with the whimsical Hollywood song ending. It's freaking brilliant.
Also, one final small thing that I noticed, about 45 minutes into the movie, he's at the height of his crisis, and he takes his tape recorder and he's like, okay, we open on the beginning of time, and then we see the whole evolution of the human series, and then we go from the atom, and then and then finally there's humans and civilization in New York.
Movie opens.
And boom, movie opens. And when I realized that was the way the actual
that's how the
movie
movie opened, yes.
I was like, oh, yes, that's great. That's genius. I love that.
Again, I'm pretty sure that everything that he writes, anything that he narrates himself writing, as he's trying to break the screenplay, actually happens in the movie at some point. Whether it be opening on the Orchid Hunter with dysentery, or opening on Charlie Kaufman himself, or LaRoche in the van, we see all of that at some point. That is in the script that he ends up ultimately making into this movie.
It's great because the moment he starts using the tape recorder is the moment you start, as an audience member, start realizing what the movie actually is, and that the movie is writing itself as it goes.
We open on Charlie Kaufman, fat, bald.
Yeah.
Which is weird because Charlie Kaufman's actually a pretty skinny guy in real life.
Not fat.
So I don't know. No. And also Nic Cage wore a fat suit for this, by the way.
He's also not bald.
Definitely doesn't see himself in the best way. He has a very, I don't know, miserable image of himself. But I think everyone who's ever had to write something that wasn't their choice, you haven't directly chosen to write this, can relate to that feeling of I'm an imposter. I can't do this. I'm just a lazy piece of shit. I'm a fake.
We really got to get Hugo out of college.
Yeah, seriously. To me, this movie was just live. I read this in my letterboxd review. It's like live action. How did they get this live action footage of me writing literally any university assignment and just having a mental breakdown? So,
well, as someone who has written his fair share of screenplays, I relate an awful lot to the Charlie Kaufman's struggle that he has. And I just want to say a direct quote from the movie. One of my favorite lines when he sits down at the typewriter. To begin, how to start. I'm hungry. I should get coffee. Maybe I should write something first and reward myself with coffee. Coffee and a muffin. Okay, so I need to establish the themes. Maybe banana nut. That's a good muffin. That's great. That's great. I don't know what to tell you. If you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you. I got nothing for you if you don't like that stuff. Yeah, final thoughts up for me, I guess. I do think my eyes kind of glaze over a little bit in the third act. But, when he's approaching the greenhouse and all that stuff. But again, some of Meryl Streep, my favorite acting from Meryl Streep is in this sequence. The Donald death sequence really, really works for me. The ending really works for me. The profound life lessons, again, really works for me, even knowing I'm being pandered to.
It's also your eyes glaze over, but maybe it's because you've seen the movie so many times.
I have seen the movie so many times.
What's happening. But again, for me, it was this is a nice change of pace, and I'm wondering how it's going to fit in the overall theme of the movie, and the fact that it does makes it even better.
This movie is also another kind of movie that I love, in that it is a movie that it is almost as much fun talking about it with other people as it is watching it itself. Which
absolutely, yes.
That's not exactly it. This isn't the only movie that's ever done that, because we've talked about a lot of movies that do that on this show. But it does earn points with me, and as we've been discussing it, my opinion of the movie has continued upward, just because I'm enjoying the conversation so much.
Yeah, man. Good note to end on, possibly. Should we rank it now?
Let's rank it.
We've established it's a good movie and it's a good movie to talk about. Okay. Where is my ranking? Okay. So you, surprisingly, maybe I should rethink where I'm putting this, because we put our tentative rankings in the outline, and you guys both have it higher than me. So maybe I should rethink where I have it.
That's interesting.
And
so when we started the episode, when we started recording the episode, I had it below Jackie Brown at number 23, and then about halfway through the episode, I was like, no, Josh is right. I put it right where Josh has it, and I'll let Josh say where he has his in a second. And then, as I said, like I just continued to think, like, yeah, you know what, this is really special. I like this. It's better than this. And now I have it where I have it at number 19, just after John Wick, which I think
I'm moving mine up a little bit.
I think there's something ironic about me putting this movie directly behind John Wick, a movie that's exactly
the third act of Adaptation. John Wick's a good movie. I'm not bad mouthing at all. Okay, so you have it at number 19 behind. So 15 through 19 is Your Name, The Wind Rises, Scream, John Wick, Grizz puts Adaptation. Hugo, where do you have it?
So I guess I have it the highest.
You do, yeah.
I don't know. First time watching it, and it made a really good impression of me, and I think it's a movie that on a rewatch would get even better. So because you would notice all the tiny little things that maybe it was hinting at here and there. So I would have it quite high on our list at number 12. So just above Citizen
Kane,
and
God,
below
the
Memories
ironies
of
are
Murder.
everywhere.
Yeah. I really, really had a great time with this movie, and again, talking about it just makes it exponentially better, I think.
Yeah. So you have it at 12. This is tough for me because like there's like a run of movies on our list that like are higher than I would put them. So like I struggle to put this ahead of Network. But at the same time, if I can get past Network, then like it jumps up several slots because the movie's right ahead of Network. I think it's better than, but I'll just put it behind Network. So I'm putting it at 20. So I have the lowest of the three of us, which is funny. So hold on, I have to do some math here real quick. So we have Hugo has it at 12. Grizz has it at 19. I have it at 20. Divided by 3, averages out to 17. So do we put it exactly 17? Does it go above or below Scream then?
Wow.
Both movies play with movie tropes in excellent ways. I think I'm going to give the edge to Adaptation.
Yeah, me too.
I agree. I'm also giving the edge to Adaptation. So I'm going to put it at 17. Behind the Wind Rises, ahead of my beloved Scream.
This is the type of movie that will end up higher in the re-ranking for sure.
Yeah, because when we do the re-ranking, Josh is going to put it where he actually wants it.
Yep.
Well, this is very much a foundational text for me in terms of when I saw it, and I watched it an awful lot in my late teens, early 20s when I was like again getting into movies. So it will be higher for me.
I just think that Josh has so many foundational texts that it's like basically he's
not
a pyramid.
That many.
He's a pyramid because the base is just so many foundational texts.
No. But yeah, I love this movie. I'm really glad that you guys seem to like it too. And I think this was one of our better episodes, personally.
I do think this was a very, very fun episode. And
yes.
I'm really happy that some people tuned in to watch it live. And if you're watching it on YouTube or listening on the podcast, good for you. You picked a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not all this good. They are. To wrap up, I guess Hugo, what do we watch next week? Did you ever even decide what we're doing?
So next week we are doing sort of a look back at 2021 and a look forward at 2022. So we're gonna each of us is gonna sort of briefly talk about our top 3 movies of the year that passed and our top 3 most anticipated movies for 2022. Even though, like, we'll try to, maybe we'll include movies that potentially are 2022, even though they're not definitely 2022.
To the best of our knowledge.
And
it's a weird moment in movies, unfortunately.
We're also going to
include... we never know when stuff is going to come out.
I'm sorry, I keep talking over you. Sorry, Hugo.
No, go ahead.
We're also going to include the movies that we, in our episode last year where we did our most anticipated movies of 2021, we're going to look back at the movies we selected for that and, see
how they panned out.
See how they actually panned out for us.
Yeah. I can tell you they panned out great for me. So.
Yeah, I need to revisit what I actually said, but based on my memory of what I said, I think I called out some doozies and they ended up really paying off, I think. So we'll see. Hugo, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at Hugo_Pinay on Twitter, and you can find me at Hugo Pinay on letterboxd. And you can listen to Large Pop on Movie Club, which is a monthly thing that I'm going to be on. This month we're talking about Thirst, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show. So if you happen to want to talk about weird Korean priest vampires, you know where to go.
Grizz.
You can find me right here on twitch.tv/goodgamegrizz. You can also find me on Twitter at goodgamegrizz and letterboxd at goodgamegrizz. But I also wanted to shout out that I've been doing a show with my friend Jennifer Van Damsel on her Twitch channel, and it's also put on her YouTube. It's called If You Ask Me, where we talk about movies, TV shows, comic books, just all the media we're consuming, and giving them reviews and ratings and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun, and you should also definitely follow Jennifer Van Damsel on Twitch and Twitter as well, so you can find out about the episodes.
Don't give out the socials of non-podcast hosts, Grizz. We talked about that. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead and follow her. I'm kidding. Sorry. You can find me on Twitter, I guess, at TheSleepJoshB. YouTube, Movies So Can You, whatever. Follow the podcast at RTF_pod. I think last week we said at RTF pod, and we are not at RTF pod. We are at RTF_pod. So I'm sure at RTF pod just got thousands of new followers because we shouted them out and they were trying to follow us.
Are they going to thank us for that? No, of course
not.
No, selfish.
Obviously not. So follow us places. Watch Adaptation if you haven't already. We just spoiled all of it for you. And then tune in again next week for another exciting episode of Remember the Film. Bye, guys.